Hi everyone, welcome to my first discography breakdown, review, ranking, whatever you want to call it, for a band. Today we're going to be talking about Dream Theater, probably the most successful progressive metal band, and one of my personal favourites. I really like Dream Theater a lot, and I thought they'd be a good band to start with for a discography breakdown. I'm going to be talking about my least favourite first, and then be making my way up to the tippy top. I am going to be counting A Change of Seasons in this. They class it as an EP, but I'm still counting it anyway. So it's going to be a total of 16 albums to get through today. So it's going to be a long one. Strap in, and I hope you all enjoy it. Also, I've got my phone in my hand. Don't mind that. It's just because I've written a script for this. I had quite a lot of notes in my head to get through, so it's just easier for me to visualize these things, and it sort of helps me go along, so don't mind that. Number 16 is When Dream and Day Unite. I think it could have been anybody's guess that this album was first on the list at the very bottom. And it's not to say that there's nothing good here, there's a lot of moments to like, but the consistency just isn't there really. It kind of feels like just a series of riffs going through the motions, one after the other. And there's quite a lot of random tempo changes that don't need to be there, which makes everything feel all the more inconsistent. The only song I can think of from the album that actually does feel like one coherent piece of music is Afterlife. The other big factor in this record that kind of makes it the black sheep of the discography is the fact that James LaBrie hadn't joined the band at this point. They had Charlie Dominici as the singer, and it's the only record that he was featured on. And without James, it just doesn't really sound like Dream Theater. I find a lot of irony in that really, because there's a lot of casual Dream Theater fans out there, and longtime fans, that say that James LaBrie is the weak link of the band. I completely disagree with that, by the way. I really do like James LaBrie as a singer. I just wanted to get that clear straight away. And most of these people that complain about James will have this album at the bottom of their list, or just show complete lack of interest in it because James isn't the singer. Now, I'm not saying that if James LaBrie had sung on this album that it would make it a masterpiece, because every other member had a lot to learn about songwriting and composition by this point, so in no means would that have made it an amazing record. But it's just kind of funny to me that a lot of people shunned this album for not having James, yet still complain about everything that James does after that. It's a bit weird. And that's not to say that Charlie is a bad singer at all, because he's not. He's actually a really good singer, but it just doesn't sound like Dream Theater. And it just goes to show, I think, how much James LaBrie does add to the band and is a major factor in their overall sound. Number 15 is The Astonishing. This is a frustrating one really, because The Astonishing has a lot to like musically overall. It's just kind of a mess. I think they bit off a bit more than they could chew conceptually, making it like this grand musical theatre-esque story with characters and character development and all this other stuff going on. It kind of just crumbled under the weight of its own ambition, really. If you look at it for just the music, it's too drawn out and a bit all over the place. And if you go into it for the story, it's just not engaging enough to keep you interested for that length of time. And while on the subject of the story, it's a little bit too on the nose and cheesy for me, and doesn't really make sense half of the time within the world and the rules that they've set up. And having all these characters voiced by James LaBrie alone and not getting in any guest singers makes this all the more confusing. If I want a story-driven Dream Theater album, then I'm likely to just put Metropolis Part 2 on. And if I want something that's more of a rock opera-esque kind of thing, with more characters and character depth and everything, then I'm probably just going to put Arion on. I mentioned in another video before, while talking about Operation Mindcrime, that concept albums work best when you can take out the songs on their own and they're still good as individual pieces of music outside the context of a massive concept album. And this album really doesn't do that. I think over 2 hours of music, I think there's only about 3 or 4 tracks that I would happily listen to on their own. Which is a shame, because as I said before, there's a lot of really good musical moments here. It's just they're really small and they're really far apart. They're too few and far between. I definitely respect them for what they were going for, but it really just didn't land for me. Number 14 is Train of Thought. I'm guessing a lot of people wouldn't have thought this would be this low. I think this is generally considered to be quite a popular album among the fan base, but for me, I'm just not really a huge fan of this album. Production-wise, this is one of the worst sounding Dream Theater albums for me. There's an aspect of the sound that feels quite empty, and I can't really pinpoint what it is, but there's something missing in the production. And the drum sound is something that I really can't get past. I hate how the drums sound on this album. The toms sound like, I've always described it as like a wet flannel hitting a wooden bench, and then they're really loud in the mix as well, so I can't even look past it. I think they were going for like a more modern metal sounding album, so I get why people liked it. It's just not what I'm looking for when I listen to Dream Theater myself. John Petrucci is an amazing guitar player, that goes without saying, but on this album a lot of his solos feel kind of lazy and uninspired, just noodling all over the place as fast as he can with no real creativity behind it for me. Stream of Consciousness is a really good instrumental, but it kind of outstays its welcome towards like the last third of the song, which I think can be said for most of the songs on this album. And In the Name of God is the biggest offender of this. It goes on really way too long, and the vocals at the end kind of make me wince with the way that they're delivered. Endless Sacrifice has potential, but kind of falls flat with the execution. The chorus is alright, but all these natural harmonics that they're doing on the guitar makes it feel like they're just trying to write a Machine Head song. I hate to sound like I'm just talking shit, I don't mean to. There's a lot of good moments on here. It's just whenever I pick up the album and have a look at the track list, nothing really gets me excited to put the CD on, unfortunately. Number 13, Systematic Chaos. This is a tough one because again, it's got a lot to like. I just find most of the album really forgettable. Repentance is the worst of the 12-step Sweet Saga that Mike Portnoy wrote. I also find In the Presence of Enemies Part 2 mostly forgettable. Prophets of War is alright, but I always kind of forget that that's even on the album until I look at it. The production is okay, definitely better than Train of Thought, but there are areas amongst the album that you really can't hear much in the way of bass at all, especially at the start of In the Presence of Enemies Part 1. And of course, this is the first of 2 albums to feature the very annoying and irritating Mike Portnoy chanty backing vocals. Apart from that, Constant Motion is a really good song, and so is Forsaken. The Dark Eternal Night has some really cool groovy riffs in there, but again, it's another song that kind of outstays its welcome and should have been a lot shorter than it was. Number 12, Distance Over Time. This was an album that I actually really enjoyed when it came out. Out of Reach and Room 137 didn't do much for me, and they still don't now, but overall they were really the only kind of problems that I had. I just don't think this album has aged very well. I now kind of, looking back, feel like I was just wanting any Dream Theater album that wasn't The Astonishing, and I kind of fooled myself into thinking it was a lot better than it was. There are a lot of really good songs like Falling Into the Light, Untethered Angel, Paralyzed is alright, and Barstool Warrior is my personal favourite on the album. I think that's a really, really good song. So nothing bad on the album, just nothing spectacular either. Number 11, Change of Seasons. This is a strange one because, like I said at the beginning, this was actually an EP. That's probably because the title track at 23 minutes in length was the only new original song on the album. Everything else were live covers and cover medleys. So in that sense, it kind of feels more like a half EP and half like live bootleg kind of thing. The standout is obviously the title track itself, A Change of Seasons. This was the first time that they'd written like a huge 23-minute song like this, before Octavarium, before 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. The song itself is really, really well written. I really love A Change of Seasons. It moves perfectly from section to section, and I think the pacing is really, really good. And I think my favourite moment is whenever the lyrics from I'm Sick of All You Hypocrites kick in. That section is really, really powerful and gets me really pumped up. I love the vocal delivery there. It's such a strong segue into the next section of the song. And I think this song deserves a lot more praise and attention than it gets. I think because it's classed as an EP, a lot of people don't really go to it until they're really into the band and they want to dig a little deeper. So I think it struggles to be heard in that sense. But yeah, if you've not heard Change of Seasons, give it a listen because it's a really, really good song. The live covers are also pretty good. I think my favourites would be the Deep Purple cover, Perfect Strangers, and I think it's called the Big Medley, where they just chop up loads of different, I think it's like 5 or 6 songs, and they'll play different sections from those songs all together. And I think it's about, I don't know, I think it's 12 or 13 minutes long. That's really good as well. It's just not enough to elevate this album higher on the list for me. I kind of wish that they had more original music to put on this album. Getting into the top 10 now, I'm going to start with Falling Into Infinity. This album gets a lot of flack and I don't really understand why. I think it's got a lot to love about it. There's a load of good songs on there like New Millennium and You Not Me, Peruvian Skies, and my personal favourite is Lines in the Sand. I love that song. Whenever there's that piano break around the middle, that's one of my favourite piano sections ever in any Dream Theater song. It's so good, the groove is amazing. I believe the band were having a little bit of a struggle internally and with record labels at the time as well, so that might have been a factor into its poor reception and maybe the writing being a little bit unfocused. It definitely is longer than it should be. I think they could have trimmed a lot of the fat here and there, but overall I think it's a really, really good album, and again, one that's quite overlooked by a lot of people and should be given a second chance. Number 9, A Dramatic Turn of Events. Not a bad album overall, there's just a couple of areas here and there that could have been trimmed, I think. Most notably, at the start of Lost Not Forgotten. There's just a lot of guitar wankery that a lot of it could have been cut out. And I'm not such a big fan of Beneath the Surface either. I think it's quite a poor ballad. I think out of all the ballady songs that Dream Theater have done, I think this is the weakest. Apart from that though, the songs that are good on this album are really good. Like On the Backs of Angels, Bridges in the Sky, The Outcry, and my personal favourite, Breaking All Illusions. This is one of my absolute favourite Dream Theater songs in their discography. It's another 13, I think, minute long song, 13, 15, I can't remember at this point. But it's a long song that has so many sections and moves, and there's a really, really tasty and soulful guitar solo from John Petrucci around the middle, which is one of his best. Something worth mentioning as well is that this is the first album without Mike Portnoy. He left the band and they brought in Mike Mangini, who also does a great job. There's a lot of wars within the fan base of Portnoy and Mangini and who's better or whatever. I don't really concern myself with those kind of arguments. I think they're both great drummers, and Mike Mangini serves the band really well. Number 8, A View from the Top of the World. The most recent in the band's discography, and I'll be honest, I wasn't huge on this one at first, but 2 or 3 listens in, I really came to appreciate it, and now I think is one of the strongest in recent years for the band. My initial problems came from the first single really, The Alien. That really didn't do much for me at the time, and that still I think is the weakest song on the album. And Invisible Monster, when they dropped that as a single, it kind of felt to me like an attempted formula copy of On the Backs of Angels. That aside though, I really do enjoy everything else. I love the grooves on Sleeping Giant. That's a really nice, slower paced but punchy song. And the title track is amazing too. It's nice to have another long 20-minute song to close an album with. We've not seen that since the 2013 self-titled album. And then I think my favourite song on the album by far is Transcending Time. A really nice and uplifting, optimistic sounding song which contradicts the rest of the album that has quite a darker tone to it. And the chorus for this song was the thing that was stuck in my head for ages after my first listen. Number 7, Black Clouds and Silver Linings. Black Clouds was actually my first proper introduction to the band. I remember stumbling across a YouTube video of the final guitar solo in The Best of Times, and I was completely blown away. It's by far one of Petrucci's best solos. It's so emotive and so powerful. It really grabs you by the chest. That whole song is amazing. The only real weak song I can think of on this album is Rite of Passage, but other than that I love all of the songs. The Count of Tuscany was a favourite of mine for a long time. I remember spending months learning that song on guitar from beginning to end, and once I had got it I was playing it pretty much every day, multiple times a day. I loved that song and I still really enjoy it now. I've probably forgotten how to play almost all of it, but I might try and relearn it again, that'll be fun. This album is also the worst offender for Portnoy's bad backing vocals, especially in Nightmare to Remember. That whole day after day, and night after night, it's just it really puts a downer on an otherwise really fantastic song. Apart from that though, as I said, it's a really strong album and will always hold a special place for me, being the first album that I'd heard and bought from the band. Number 6, Dream Theater, the 2013 self-titled album. I absolutely love this album. I thought it was a really great return to form for the band. It's kind of reminiscent of Images and Words from a compositional standpoint, with a lot of modernisms thrown in as well to make it fresh. And I don't know if any modern era Dream Theater album will ever top this one for me. There isn't a song on here that I consider weaker than any others, and none of them feel fillery in any place. It runs through from beginning to end really smoothly, and it's a really well produced album as well. I think sonically this sounds different to every other Dream Theater album out there, and I really like the way it sounds. It's a complete and well-rounded album that makes every single song feel unique to itself. I think my favourite songs from this one would be The Looking Glass, Behind the Veil. I really love Illumination Theory, and the single The Enemy Inside as well is really good. This was actually the first album to be released after I became a fan. I remember being really hyped for this one, and The Enemy Inside single really drew me in. Starting the top 5 with Octavarium. This is an absolutely incredible album that I revisit quite often. It's really rich in concept as well, and if you dig into the little intricacies surrounding its relation to music and octaves and everything, it's all the more interesting, and I think music nerds will get a kick out of it as well. The 24-minute title track is an absolute masterpiece and still holds up almost 20 years later. Panic Attack, These Walls and The Root of All Evil are probably the standout tracks for me beyond the title track. And something that I really appreciate as well is with albums like this where you have a massive long track either at the start or the end, a lot of the other songs can kind of sometimes feel like an afterthought. The best example I can think for this is 2112 by Rush. The title track is amazing, but the other songs are just kind of there and don't really do much. This album avoids that completely. Every song really feels like it's well realized and have a reason for being there, and you can tell that they weren't an afterthought next to the title track itself. I know I said that I'm not a massive fan of Sacrifice Sons, but that's just a me thing, because if I look at it objectively, I can see that every song was well thought out, and none of them felt that they were less important than the title track itself. Number 4, 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence, another album that I think gets a little bit overlooked. I absolutely adore this album. I think it was the second Dream Theater album that I ever bought, and I remember listening to it a lot. It's the band's first double album, the first disc being a collection of 5 songs, 3 of which are over 10 minutes. And Misunderstood is one of my absolute favourite Dream Theater songs and always has been. I really, really love that song. The weaker song from this disc for me, I would say, is Disappear. It just feels quite bleak. I know that that's the point given the subject matter, but it's just a little bit too much for me. Other than that though, I really love the first disc, and the second disc is absolutely flawless. A collection of tracks all blended together to make one 42-minute piece of music that twists and turns perfectly and really ropes you in. Lyrically, it's themed around various different types of mental illness, and what I like about this album is it doesn't feel cheap. When they're talking about that, you can really tell that a lot of thought was put behind the lyrics, and it really brings awareness to these illnesses, and I really appreciate that. Top 3 now, starting with Images and Words. It kind of pains me a little bit to put such an iconic and amazing album at number 3. I think that just goes to show how great the top 2 are, and also what brings this album down a little bit for me. This might be a controversial opinion, but I'm not really that fond of Metropolis Part 1, The Miracle and The Sleeper. I find it quite unfocused and incoherent in areas, and I can kind of just take or leave it, really. Every other song on this album is perfect, all of them, but Metropolis Part 1 really doesn't live up to the quality of everything else on the disc. Anyway, that's my hot take. I await your rage in the comments. In regards to the whole album though, this is the best produced Dream Theater album for me. The tone of every single instrument I absolutely love. The snare sound is one of my favourite snare sounds ever. I love the drums on this album. I think, if I'm right, Mike Portnoy hated the drum sound on this album, so I think we've just got different drum sound tastes, because I hate the way Train of Thought sounds. And Labrie is on fire on this album too. It was his first album with the band. His vocals soar in this album, and he's really diverse in his range and delivery as well, which I really, really like. I think this is a good album if you want to introduce somebody into the band. It's a really good jumping off point if you're wanting to get into them. Number 2, Metropolis Part 2, Scenes from a Memory. I don't even know where to begin with this album really. It flows effortlessly from track to track, making a huge 70+ minute piece of music that tells an enthralling and gripping story about a murder mystery surrounding a love affair in the 1920s. I remember putting this album off for quite a while because I wanted to make sure that when I listened to it I had no distractions and I could just be completely immersed in it. I think it was on a bus journey on my way home from college that I decided to listen to this album through YouTube, and I was absolutely blown away. It's still today considered one of the best, if not the best, progressive metal concept albums out there, and I don't think many people would argue with that. It's my favourite too. It's so well crafted and realised in a compositional sense, as well as being able to tell a story confidently that keeps you genuinely invested throughout the entire runtime. And like I said when talking about The Astonishing, it's difficult to make a concept album where it both works as a full story and where you can take pretty much every single track out and listen to it on its own. Metropolis Part 2 does that. The song Home is a storytelling masterpiece for me. I love the way that with each passing verse and chorus, it's a different character's perspective. That's another thing as well. James Labrie does a really good job here of playing the part of every single character. I think because he pulled it off so well here, it made him a little too ambitious on The Astonishing. Here is a really good example of playing each character very well. I think this is a lot of people's favourite Dream Theater album, and that would be the case for me too, if not for this next one. Number 1, Awake. So if you'd seen my favourite albums of all time video, you would have been able to tell that this would be my favourite Dream Theater album as well. It came second in my top 10 albums of all time list, and actually I'm going to backtrack a little bit here now. After listening to this album again for this list, I think I've changed my mind, and I would put Awake as my favourite album of all time. Not to discredit Symphony X because I love that band and that album, but Awake is an absolute masterpiece for me. It has just about everything you could want from a Dream Theater album. It covers everything that they've done stylistically since and before then, and it takes the listener through so many different atmospheres and emotions. James LaBrie's voice is the best it's ever been, and something I don't see praised as often as I'd like is the lyrics on this album. Most Dream Theater albums don't really boast much in the way of lyricism, but I think Awake has a lot of really profound and almost poetic lyrics in it.
I'm lying here in bed, swear my skin is inside out, just another Sunday morning. See my diary on the newsstand, seems we've lost the truth to quicksand. It's a shame no one is praying, 'cause these voices in my head keep saying love just don't stand.
Over half the songs on this album had the lyrics written by John Petrucci, and he really shines as the lyricist on this record. Kevin Moore also wrote lyrics to 3 of the songs before leaving the band that are also really good. Something else I really like on this album as well are like samples of movie dialogue interspliced here and there. A lot of people might find it quite, I don't know, obnoxious or intrusive and quite artsy-fartsy, but I really quite like it. I think it really adds to the atmosphere of the songs, especially in The Mirror and Space Divest. And apart from in Change of Seasons, they've never really done that since. I don't think the production is quite as good as Images and Words, but I still think it's really well produced, and sonically doesn't sound like anything else in Dream Theater's discography either. I think you can instantly tell when something is from Awake. I know that this one is kind of overlooked in the discography as well, and I don't know why, but yeah, give it another listen and let me know what you think of it, because it's a masterpiece for me. Mwah. Anyway, those are all my thoughts on Dream Theater's discography, ranked from my least favourite to my most favourite. Let me know what yours are, if you're a big fan of the band, if you just know of them but not really given them much attention. And let me know what your favourite Dream Theater album is, rank them if you want, I want to know what people think. Half the reason that I want to do all these lists and everything is because I want to see yours as well and compare. Do remember to like and subscribe and all that stuff, and please consider checking out my Patreon if you want to see other little things that I have to offer. I've got a lot of exclusive stuff going on over there, which would be fun to have more people involved in. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.